Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Friday Night Lights edition of Two Way Tonight. Glad you're able to join us on Friday before we set into the weekend, where there will be lots of campaigning. We may have a pop-up episode or two, but wanted to end Friday by talking about where I see things stand. As always, take your questions and comments. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for joining. If you're there, please engage in the chat with peace, love, and understanding. We're going to talk a little bit about the threat to peace, love, and understanding that I'm feeling around me in just a bit. If you're here on two-way, thank you for joining. If you'd like to get a question or comment in, please raise your electronic hand, and we'd love to hear from you. As always, we'd love to hear from new people, and we'd love to hear from supporters of all the candidates, not just one. We're continuing to work on that. There are lots of Harris and Trump supporters and people who aren't going to vote for either. Lots as part of this community, and for whatever reason, Trump supporters have been raising their hands a little bit more lately. We're going to correct that organically. Please, if you're a supporter of Kamala Harris, don't be shy, raise your hand. All right, there's been a relative absence of polling this week. Some national polls, some state polls, but not a lot, and certainly not enough to change the people who form their perceptions off of the public polling, change it in a dramatic way. It is still the sense that Donald Trump has more paths to 270 electoral votes, but that the battleground states, all 7 of them, could fall in either direction. And this is an unprecedented situation. No one expects the field of 7 to shrink or grow. 7 for the duration. And again, all 7 very much in play. There are outliers, and some analysts would say Trump's definitely going to win Arizona, or Trump's definitely going to win North Carolina, or Harris is definitely going to win Wisconsin. But there's not a lot of that. And part of why I make Trump the favorite right now, but not the absolute favorite, is because there are 3 states, 3 of the 4 Sun Belt states, where there are some Republicans not spinning, gauging an analysis, who believe Trump has got those, that he'll eventually win them. At this point, you can't say that about any of the blue wall states for Harris, and that's one of his advantages. In the absence of polls, 4 things have gotten focused today, as I've experienced it talking to my sources and following the ebb and flow on cable and on social media. One is the question of Vice President Harris's performance level on the stump. Lots of events today in Michigan. We'll show you a little bit of some. And driving that message we talked about on the morning meeting. Shifting from talking about being middle class and some of the agenda, although not entirely, and shifting towards that Trump is unstable and unsteady and unhinged, and connecting it as the campaign did in the new ad, as David Plouffe did on CNN today, to the real lives of real people. This is apparently, at least right now, the closing message that Trump's manner, Trump's mental condition, in the view of the Democrats, they're arguing will impact families, and that therefore you should choose Vice President Harris because Trump's policies will be derivative of his mental state and his past actions. So her performance in delivering that message and on the stump in general has got one focus today. Another is Trump's performance. I continue to just be amused and amazed that Democrats want to just go right to the George Conway School of Political Analysis and say he is unhinged, he's lost his mind, he's old, he's feeble, he can't do anything. We'll show you a clip related to that back and forth. And then, of course, the continuing discussion about the early vote data. And good people of good faith with good data continuing to argue about, in the battleground states where there is data available, how much of it argues that Republicans are well positioned, how much Democrats. We know the fundamentals. We'll keep repeating them here. Democrats are going to do better than Republicans in early vote. They're not going to do as much better as they did in 2020. Will the delta between how they did in 2020 and how they do this time be something that people can point to and say, this shows that Trump is going to be advantaged headed into Election Day in a significant way, or not? That's the debate. That's the discussion. And I deal all day with indignant people on both sides who say, you knucklehead, to borrow the word, can't you read data? Can't you tell young people and black voters are underperforming in early vote? And that's a horrible sign for Kamala Harris. And then Democrats saying those 2 groups don't do as well in early vote. And so the fact that they're lagging is not indicative of a problem. It's crazy to me that since there is data, that this can't be figured out. I'm embarrassed that I can't figure it out. If I spent all my time doing nothing else but figuring it out, I'd have a better handle on it, and I do plan to devote some time to it this weekend. All right. As I said, big issue is the question of the confidence that Democrats have. We went into the weekend, last weekend, a week ago, with Democrats feeling really worried. And because of developments over the weekend and into the early part of the week and through most of this week, I would say Democrats felt a lot better. They felt energized. And part of that is the Fox interview was, I believe people mischaracterize it, a Republican spin for the most part, in saying the Fox interview was intended to simply rev up the base. Just don't believe that. It was intended to rev up the base and to reach undecided voters, more moderate, including some Republicans. I don't know if it achieved the second thing. It certainly achieved the first. And part of why Democrats were feeling better in the middle of the week was because the base was revved up. And when the base revs up, the blue echo chamber says she's doing great. She fought with Bret Baier. She's doing these podcasts. She's out on the stump. Her performance level, as we saw this morning in the clips we showed, is better. And so they were feeling better. It swung back a little bit tonight. And the main reason I believe it swung back, or not the main reason, a main reason, is an ad from Bob Casey, the Democratic incumbent senator in Pennsylvania, whose polling lead over Dave McCormick, his Republican challenger, has tightened according to almost every public poll and private polling, which shows the race almost to dead even. And Bob Casey, like all incumbents, is interested in Kamala Harris winning, but he's interested in saving his job. And I think Republicans are making a very big deal about this ad. You'll see why in a moment. And Democrats are trying to avoid talking about it. So let's take a look at number one, please. Bob Casey, new ad in Pennsylvania.
A Republican.
And I'm a Democrat.
Our marriage, pure bliss. But on politics, we just don't agree. Except for Bob Casey. He's independent.
That's right.
Casey's leading the effort to stop corporate greedflation and price gouging. Casey bucked Biden to protect fracking. And he sided with Trump to end NAFTA and put tariffs on China to stop them from cheating. So in this House, we agree. It's Bob Casey who's doing right by Pennsylvania.
I'm Bob Casey, and I definitely approve this message.
So we'll talk to our guests in a moment about that ad, and I'll probably show it to you again because I think it's so significant. But you imagine, trying to think of an analog for that, if Rick Scott in Florida ran an ad bragging about working with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on two things, how remarkable that would be. So what Republicans are saying, and again, I want to hear our Democrats to see what they think about it. What they're saying is it shows Bob Casey knows that Donald Trump is strong in Pennsylvania. Some say it shows they know he's going to win Pennsylvania. Kind of extraordinary in the polarized environment in which we live. Whatever you want to read into it, just at a minimum, for an incumbent Democratic senator, a member of a party that despises Donald Trump, to brag about his working with Trump on two issues is a pretty big deal. We'll get back to that with our guests in a moment. Kamala Harris, as I said, performance. And she's going hard after Trump on this new theme of he's deranged, he's unfit, and that'll be bad for your families. She hit that throughout the day at her various appearances. They're still going on. Trump's got a rally coming up towards the end of this program in Michigan. So there's still lots of campaigning to do today. But let's take a look first at Kamala Harris accusing Donald Trump of being exhausted, and then Trump's response. Go ahead and play that, please.
But none of that is what we hear from Donald Trump. Instead, it is just the same old tired playbook. He has no plan for how he would address the needs of the American people. And he is, as we have seen, only focused on himself. And now he is ducking debates and canceling interviews. Come on. And check this out. His own campaign team recently said it is because of exhaustion. Well, if you are exhausted on the campaign trail, it raises real questions about whether you are fit for the toughest job in the world. Come on. Come on.
How do you think this affects the border? Kamala Harris said she thinks you're exhausted, and that's why you're canceling events. Are you exhausted?
What events have I canceled? I haven't canceled. She doesn't go to any events. She's a loser. She doesn't go to any events. She didn't even show up for the Catholics last night at the hotel. It was insulting. All they are sound bites. So today I was at Fox and Friends at 7 in the morning. I then went to 2 different other appearances. I then made about 15 phone calls. I've gone 48 days now without arrest, and I've got that loser who doesn't have the energy of a rabbit. Let me tell you something. She should have been last night with the Catholics. So all they do is put out sound bites. Tell me when you've seen me take even a little bit of a risk. Not only am I'm not even tired. I'm really exhilarated. You know why? We're killing her in the polls because the American people don't want her. She didn't pass her bar exam. She's not a smart person. She's not a person that should represent our country. So I just want to let you know that very clearly. Go ahead.
So a few things about that. First of all, one of my things that I detest is when campaigns of either side take blind quotes from articles and act like it was like a public announcement. His campaign did not announce he was exhausted. There is a report that says that a booker for him canceling a press aide with dealing with a booker canceling an interview said he had to cancel because he was exhausted. It's possible it happened, but ridiculous. But you know, both sides do it. And so she's out there. She baited him. That's just like what happened in the debate. She baits him. He comes back. He can't stand being accused of being low energy Donald. So he comes back. I'll say her performance there, excellent. Every clip I've seen of her today on the stump, to my ear and eye, she's more comfortable. She's energized. And we'll talk about this. I saw Dan earlier today, and Dan will join us, but he'll make the point himself. But she's doing something she's comfortable doing. She's attacking Donald Trump. That's more comfortable than defending her position on fracking, etc. So, a few more videos to look at. Good on the stump. She did a pull aside with Peter Alexander of NBC. I'm not really sure what the circumstances of it were. I never understand why these campaigns do these pull asides because the candidates just don't look all that presidential. You just go look at all the pull asides in American presidential campaign history. They tend not to be that good for the candidate. I don't know why, but that's my subjective impression. So here is Kamala Harris, Peter Alexander of NBC, asking her for the 19th time she's been asked, how do you differ? How would you differ from Joe Biden? Number 3, please.
This week, President Biden said this week that every president has to cut their own path. What is one policy that you would have done differently over these last 3.5 years than President Biden?
I mean, to be very candid with you, even including Mike Pence, vice presidents are not critical of their presidents. I think that really actually, in terms of the tradition of it and also just going forward, it does not make for a productive and important relationship.
He's now given you that green light with his comments that you can carve your own path. So now that you have this ability to say that to be on your own?
Well, no, going forward, there is no question that I bring my own experiences and my own life experiences.
Is there a policy that stands out to you in particular, either?
Sure. I mean, my approach to what we need to do around Medicare covering home health care, born out of my experience of taking care of my mother. My priority on housing, one, because I know what it means, affordable housing and the ability to buy a home. Again, my own experience, my mother saved up, and not until I was a teenager was she able to do it. But also I know that for so many young people who I speak with around our country, the American dream is just really out of reach. So my policy about $25,000 down payment assistance to help them get their foot in the door. The work that I have been doing and will bring to the presidency around emphasizing small businesses as being part of the real backbone of America's economy. Those are the experiences and the ideas that I have that are about moving forward and really in being a part of the next generation of leadership in America.
Last one, I know I got.
So I believe the last time she was asked with Brett, and you recall that what she said with Brett was, my presidency would not be a continuation of Joe Biden's. A pretty strong rhetorical break, no specifics, but a pretty strong rhetorical break. And I wondered after she said that, was that going to now be her refrain? Or maybe would she build on that? And the next time she'd say, my presidency wouldn't be a continuity. For instance, here's what I would do differently specifically. We all know that, at least intuitively, and based on qualitative research, that there's some undecided voters who would like to understand how she'd be different. I think that answer is pretty horrendous. That's my view of that answer. Back to, we wouldn't really be that different. And then, you know, a laundry list of her experiences and kind of implicit implication that her experiences would make it different and therefore better, but no specifics. So say again, I think her performance level is clearly elevated in rallies, in dealing with voters, more relaxed, more comfortable. That wasn't great. All right, last thing I want to look at. Donald Trump, lawfare, legal cases. We spent months suggesting this was it. This was going to be the decisive thing that decided if he could win or not, that it helped him win the nomination, but it would hurt him in the general. And these 4 prosecutors rushing to try to get these cases done in a way that, again, independent of what you think about his actions or what he did or allegedly did, many of us thought that this was an effort to hurt him politically by Democratic prosecutors. It seemed pretty obvious that it was, and that it was an overreach, and that it was helping him actually even in the general because it was energizing Republicans. And he was scoring political victories in the context of these legal decisions that pushed all the cases back. I said from the beginning, I'll pat myself on the back here, that the wheels of justice grind very slowly. They grind even more slowly when someone spends millions of dollars on lawyers to delay things. And these cases were all complicated, and particularly the gray mail case in Florida. So today, Donald Trump did an interview, a podcast interview with Bongino, and it came shortly before we got hundreds of pages of almost entirely redacted material from Jack Smith. There was a big fight. Trump's lawyers said Jack Smith shouldn't be allowed to introduce this new evidence in public forum. The Judge Chutkan, made an interesting decision. She said, if we delay releasing it, that's just as much election interference as putting it out, so we should put it out. Sure, there's a public right to know, and I totally appreciate that. But to err on the side of hurting the defendant, again, seems like a curious decision if the judge is trying to be impartial. Nonetheless, they put out, so far, nothing. I haven't had time to read the documents myself, but nothing I've read about them suggests there's anything in them. I wonder if the redactions increased. It's hard to imagine why the Trump people cared. In any event, he was asked today in a podcast interview about what was then the pending release of these additional documents. Here's what he said. Number 6, please.
Like deranged Jack Smith. This is a deranged individual.
Do you see he's going to release another manifesto? I mean, is this guy is absolutely scum.
Before the election?
I've never seen anything like it. This is like tyranny.
And the judge is allowing
hammer sickle stuff.
And the judge is allowing him to do it, and it's not even believable. This guy is a sick puppy, and they're going to release something else, and always before the election. You know, they want to do it before the election. Yeah. So election interference. No, it's a terrible thing, what's happening. And the judges, this judge is the most evil person.
I never see anything like it.
She was,
Chutkan.
They all said, well, make sure you don't get Chutkan. And who did I get? I got Chutkan. I got Chutkan. It's
She's
all right.
a real prize.
It's all right.
All right. So, Noah, if you could bring in our 4 guests. Well, I sum this up here as I see it. Harris with Peter Alexander, to me, not to my ear and eye, not great. Okay. Donald Trump there, not great. To my ear and eye, he's talking about just putting back in the news all of this stuff. I always say, though, if you're not in a Green Bay diner, you can't really say if this is having any impact on voters. But it shows that both these candidates are putting themselves in situations, subjecting themselves to questioning and giving answers that are not particularly helpful. And in the case of Trump, he's courting all of these opportunities to do this. All right. So 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, Tricia McLaughlin, Drew Holden, Republicans, Hank Morris, and Dan, who we'll see shortly, Democrats. Welcome all. Let's play the Bob Casey ad again, just because I want everybody to be able to see it. And now you know what you're watching for. You're watching to see how Bob Casey, Democratic Senate candidate, is clinging to Donald Trump and celebrating his association. Let's play that one more time, and then I'm going to want all of you to say what you think about it.
Republican.
And I'm a Democrat.
Our marriage, pure bliss. But on politics, we just don't agree. Except for Bob Casey. He's independent.
That's right.
Casey's leading the effort to stop corporate greedflation and price gouging. Casey bucked Biden to protect fracking. And he sided with Trump to end NAFTA and put tariffs on China to stop them from cheating. So in this House, we agree. It's Bob Casey who's doing right by Pennsylvania.
I'm Bob Casey, and I definitely approve this message.
All right, I'm going to have to bring everybody back in. I apologize for that. But while we do that, Dan, start with you. What do you think the reaction in Harris world is to that spot?
They're not happy. It's Friday, so they may even be having a cocktail now. I mean, look, if you think your candidate has 50.1% of the vote and you're a Senate candidate in that state, you hug their policy positions. You want their voters to vote for you. When you're trailing or your top of the ticket is trailing and Bob Casey's running about 5 points better than Harris, you are trying to cling to those voters that are splitting their ticket. And, you know, there's the raw politics of it as well, that here we are talking about Harris's new message of kind of anti-Trump. He's unhinged. He's unsteady. We cannot go back to this. And you have a candidate in a huge swing state. Tammy Baldwin is running something similar in Wisconsin now. Elise Slotkin, I've heard in the last hour, is up with something also similar in Michigan. So the three blue wall states, you have candidates that are basically saying, I'm with Trump on these policy positions, and it really undercuts that he's unsteady, unhinged, and we can't go back to him.
All right, Dan, thank you. And thanks to all four of you for joining. Tricia, you next. What's your view? Explain why Republicans are so happy about this ad.
I mean, the first thing that strikes me is he's independent. At no point in that ad do they say that Bob Casey is a Democrat. So that in itself is damning. But the other piece of this that struck me was that the fact that they were saying he sided with him on NAFTA. Of course, Kamala Harris and the Democrats are using the fact that Trump is saying he's going to be tariff man and he's going to implement all these tariffs, saying, you know, those tariffs are going to be passed on to the American people, almost like an additional tax. So that kind of takes, you know, the wind out of Kamala Harris's sails, at least on that issue. So I can only imagine if this was, you know, McCormick's ad and he's saying he would side with Biden and side with Harris, Trump would be apoplectic. This is definitely not a good harbinger. And I'm very curious about the other ads that Dan referred to. I haven't seen those, but if I'm Harris's team, you're stuck at this point.
Yep. Those ads are in the same direction. They're not quite as explicit as that. Hank, you've worked with Senator Schumer. He obviously wants to win Senate races, but he also doesn't want Donald Trump to win. How do you think the politics of that ad, just speculating, how does an ad like that get made and approved? And what do you think the impact of it is?
So first of all, I think it's a fantastic ad. And if any Democrats don't like it, tough luck. They're just complaining about nothing. I know Bob Casey, and Bob Casey is a middle-of-the-road Democrat. And for him to communicate in a 50-50 state that he could work with both sides, every single swing district Republican in the Northeast in California for Congress all day long is talking about how bipartisan they are. I don't know why Bob Casey can't do that too. And any political consultant who's looking at a 50-50 race, even if they're up by a couple of points, they want to try to get to some from the other side. It just makes total sense.
Yeah. So Hank, let me just follow with you, and then I want to bring Drew in. So last night, Chuck Schumer sat on the dais at the Al Smith dinner next to Donald Trump. And although I think he tried to avoid joking around with him, he was a foot away from him, and Trump kept joking with him, and Chuck joked around a little bit back. So the reason I'm raising that is, as you know, there are many people in your party who don't think Donald Trump is George W. Bush or Mitt Romney. They think he's Satan. And so Bob Casey isn't just putting some Republican in his ad in a favorable way. He's putting Satan in his ad. Doesn't he risk alienating Democrats in his state, in the base of the Democratic Party, to say, I'm a guy who worked with Donald Trump?
No more than Bill Clinton did when he had his sister soldier moment. No more than Vice President Harris has done when she's tough on the border. That's what people do.
But embracing Donald Trump for a lot of Democrats,
nobody embraced Donald Trump here. No, that's massively overstating what happened.
All right.
He said he supported him on one policy, on one
two
issue.
Two policies actually.
What were the two?
On trade and on tariffs.
Trade and tariffs are
they're related, but
I guess
NAFTA,
you mean fracking?
Yeah, sorry, fracking and tariffs.
Okay.
Sorry, fracking and tariffs. Two big issues. Drew, I'd love for you to weigh in on the ad, and then I'd love for you, because this is your area of expertise, I'd love for you to say where you think we are in terms of the media's love affair with Kamala Harris. Do you see it having lessened at all, or do you see it continuing apace as it has since she assumed the top slot?
Yeah, so I think starting with the ad, one of the things I think is really important was that it focused on fracking, right? Obviously, it's a huge issue of interest in Pennsylvania, but it's also an issue where Kamala Harris has a huge vulnerability. If you go back to 2019, she did an interview with CNN, their CNN Climate Emergency Town Hall, I think it was called. And she said there was absolutely no doubt she was going to ban fracking, right? And so it totally makes sense to me that someone like Casey would say, whoa, I don't want to be tied to Harris on plenty of issues, but definitely not fracking more than any. And so to me, the fact that that issue is front and center, it's not just something he's hiding from, but he's putting out the opposite message out on an ad, I think is super relevant. To your point about the media, yeah, I don't want to say that the media love affair is dying out or drying up, but I have noticed over the last couple of weeks, we haven't seen as many hope and joy kind of headlines, right? The New York Times isn't trotting out headlines that says something like Kamala Harris built her campaign on joy. She was afraid to laugh before and now she's laughing. And I don't think it's that the media is throwing away that kind of language, but I do think it kind of points to the way the media sees the stakes. I think when she first took over from Biden as the candidate, there was truly some euphoria on the Democratic side. I'm sure Hank and Dan could speak to it a lot better than I could, but I think that there's kind of a sentiment now that, oh, this is real, right? She's started doing these interviews. She started going out to the press. She had that interview on ABC, on NBC, certainly with Bret Baier, and I don't think they've gone that well. Mark, I think your point to start the conversation that it did energize the base a little bit is fair, but I think that's mostly because she just made it through, right? And so I think increasingly we're seeing
she more than made it through for the base's point of view. She was feisty.
Sure. Yeah, she was feisty, she pushed back, but one of the things that really struck me, and it struck me listening to that interview with Alexander too, is a lot of her lines, a lot of the things she's saying, they feel almost a little bit canned, right? It's like she's got her talking points and she sticks to them. And particularly on Alexander's point about what she would do differently, I think it's important to remember, she's inviting this question, right? Her campaign tagline, and Baier brought this point up the other night, one of her campaign taglines is she's turning the page. What is she turning it from and what is she turning it to? I don't think the American people have that answer. And I think even the media is starting to get a little curious about that.
Yeah. Hank, I just want to clarify with you. I understand you're saying, if I understand you correctly, you're saying it makes sense for the Casey campaign to do that spot. If you were the Harris campaign, would it bother you, or you don't think it's negative for them?
I mean, it might bother me ever so slightly. It would be water off a duck's back. That's what candidates do. It's not perfect. Harris could probably find some examples where when she was in the Senate, she worked with Trump on something. And by the way, I'm not sure it would be a dumb thing for her to talk about.
Right. Okay. If you want to get in the conversation here, if you're on our two-way platform, please raise your hand. We're going to get you in a moment. I just want to go around now, starting with Dan, then Tricia, then Hank, then Drew. Just where do you see the race? Just a couple sentences or a paragraph, whatever. Where do you see the race right now? Which states are you starting to think might be pushed one way or the other, if any? Dan.
So worry in the blue wall states. I think Pennsylvania's been hard from the beginning. And I think there was a thought a month ago that Wisconsin and Michigan, not safe, but people were optimistic. That optimism is now gone. And it's like a little bit of a white knuckle. I think on the other side, Trump has not pulled away in the Sun Belt. And even though the Trump people think, let's say their 1 point, 2 point leads are durable and they're going to hold on, he hasn't moved those states to 3, 4, 5 point deficits the way the blue wall is kind of, he's got momentum there. So, Democrats are nervous. We do that well. And I think this has been a better week than last week. So they're ending it with a little more optimism than they did last Friday.
Yeah. Tricia, before you do the presidential, I think it was last time you were here, you kind of got some eyebrows raised when you said you thought the Nebraska Senate race was super competitive. Since then, there's been some polling and some resources. Are you feeling at all better for your party in the Nebraska Senate race, or you still think that's one to closely watch? And then talk about the presidential.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting race. I think that Deb Fischer will ultimately, pull it off, and I'm not as worried this last week. I think I'm more optimistic on the Republican side across the board, whether it be for the Senate and for the presidential race. These RCP averages in the battleground states, Trump, of course, up, but only within the margin of error. So by no means a landslide at this point. I do want to point out, going back to the Pennsylvania piece of this, that Bob Casey, he hasn't campaigned with Kamala Harris in almost, I think it was over a month, versus Dave McCormick is on Trump like white on rice. Whenever he's going there for a rally, he's right there. So I think that shows something that's revealed in the probably internal polling. On the Michigan front, since both candidates have been there today, I think the Muslim vote is of course, going to be interesting. I thought Kamala Harris, after Yahya Sinwar was killed yesterday, she really got right up front. I think Biden released a statement, but she looked very presidential with the flags behind her and saying justice was served. So I thought that was an interesting move, just given what the dynamics in Detroit are. And I'm wondering, what is she seeing there? Is she kind of giving up on that block, given that it's looking like Trump has an advantage with Muslim voters in Michigan, and she's trying to shore up more of the Jewish vote or the pro-Israel vote? But that's something I'm definitely keeping an eye on, because I think she's definitely been more hawkish on that might be the wrong word, but that's the phrase I would use, on the Israel front, than I think we've seen her before.
Yeah, they've made a series of decisions, particularly related to the Middle East and the storms, where I don't think she's sort of gone all in, right? She's kind of been more visible, more prominent, more likely to make a public statement than a normal vice president, but not, flying down there and running a command center or speaking at great length about the Middle East. So again, if she whether she wins or loses, there will be scrutiny of how she's handled those things, for sure.
But given those 100,000 uncommitted voters that we saw during the primary for Democrats, it's an interesting play.
No question. She made a choice there, and you're right, it could tip in one direction to her disadvantage. Hank, how do you see the race overall?
So on a granular level, I have no idea. Everything's too close to call. I have no idea. I have no real data. From a broader perspective, I think there are a couple of things that are important. First of all, the Trump campaign has done a good job of turning this into two bad choices, which it probably wasn't 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, I think since the debate, Trump has done a pretty decent job of hiding in plain sight. He hasn't really made any new news. He hasn't acted any crazier than he normally acts. People are used to how he's acting. Third, it seems to me, and I learned this as a very basic thing, they're spending a fortune on the trans ad. And my guess is it's having some impact, and it's not being answered. I mean,
let me stop you. David Plouffe was asked about that today on CNN, and he basically didn't engage. He said it's a distraction. Voters don't care. This is a case, and Drew, when you get the floor, you'll maybe pick up on this. The press is not covering it, right? The press is vaguely covering it, but it's a serious charge. She completely dodged in the Bret Baier interview. The Republicans are quite confident that the money they put behind that ad is doing damage. As you've pointed out, they're not responding. If they had earned media behind it, if the press were covering this, if this were a Democratic charge against a Republican, it'd be doing a lot more damage. But because they put so much money behind it, it seems to be doing damage. And Hank, what's the argument for not responding? And if you think they should respond, what would their response look like?
Well, I don't know enough to know. One response is, I guess I grew up in this business where Al D'Amato said Chuck Schumer was soft on crime. And there's one answer to that. Al D'Amato's soft on crime.
Well, they tried that. They tried that by piggybacking off the New York Times story that said this policy was in place.
Not in paid media. They're
not in
$100
paid
million.
It's hard. It's hard to respond when she won't say what her position was. Right. One way to respond would be to say, like with fracking, I've changed my view. But she doesn't seem to want to say that.
I don't even think she has to do that. All she has to do is say that was the rule when Trump was president and didn't do anything about it, period. I mean, it mucks it up. She's not going to win the issue.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a plus for her. It just
I'd like
mucks
to
it
I'd
up.
like to see that 30-second script. That seems complicated, but go ahead.
The fourth point I wanted to make is there's two different levels on how you can communicate, particularly in a presidential campaign. What we used to call effect, which was factual stuff or made up factual stuff, and affect, which was more emotional. And lately, there's no positive emotion coming from the Harris campaign. And I don't mean vibe. Vibe would be part of it, I guess. But there's no touchy feeling emotional. There's no the whole world is watching
Right.
what we're doing here.
Right. No Franco Harris tossing his jersey.
Yeah. So I think that's a missed opportunity. And I think if she loses, it'll be one of the reasons why she loses. And in the old days, it's what you would do in the last week in paid. The last week started 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, the only conflict with what you're saying is undecided voters still want to hear serious stuff from her. And she goes to vibes and doing like a sing along with Usher. It leaves the wrong impression for those voters who still want to know, would she be a good steward of a good economy? Vibes isn't going to answer that.
Supposedly she has the resources to do a bunch of different things.
Yep.
Apparently she doesn't have the resources to do targeted direct mail.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Drew, how do you see the race overall?
Yeah, I think overall, I would maybe put a somewhat sharper point on Dan's earlier point about the blue wall not looking like very much of a wall. And I think that that's significant, and I think it's relevant. And if I were a Democrat, I'd be quite worried about the fact that these kind of bastions of where Democratic power and confidence should be aren't actually providing that right now. But Mark, I think you made a really good point about the salience on that trans ad, because I think one of the reasons it's so salient is because, as you just mentioned, a lot of voters, independents, Democrats, the kind of curious Republican who might vote for someone like Harris, they don't know what her policies are, right? And that's not specific to that issue. It's not specific to the border, but I think it runs the gamut on a lot of her policies. She's flip-flopped. She hasn't been clear. She hid from the media for like 3 weeks when she took over the nomination. And so I think people are rightly wondering, who is this person? What would she actually do when she came into office? And I think as a result of that ambiguity, and as a result of not being able to get that affirmative message across to viewers, the incisive, hey, this is what she'll do from the Republicans is super effective. It's hitting against a point where she's vulnerable and where she's not making, I don't think, enough of an effort to put forward something that says, oh no, this is why you're wrong. And so I think those sorts of things are, especially as we come kind of down the wire on this, I think they're going to continue to be very impactful. And if they're not kind of sought out and responded to or beaten back by the Harris campaign, I do think they're going to have a big impact. And I think the closer we get to the election, if those things aren't addressed, the worse it portends for her.
Yeah. Drew, just to finish up, and then we're going to start going to your questions. So again, if you'd like to get in, please raise your hand. I know this is like the biggest softball I could possibly ask you, but I'm assuming you agree with my analysis that there's been very little press coverage of this issue and of her evasive answer, and that if the shoe were on the other foot, there would just be lots of New York Times and Washington Post stories about it.
Yeah, and I think admittedly a softball, but one of the I think the most humorous things that I've seen from the press side across this campaign was there were a bunch of outlets who fact checked Trump when he made this claim, the one that's about supporting transgenders, and the New York Times put out the most bizarre apologetic fact check where they said it sounds really crazy, but it is actually true, right? And so I think as a result, the reason that this is so impactful, again, it's like the fact that she raised her hand in 2019 when she said she wanted to decriminalize border crossings. It's, wow, that's insane. I wonder if she believes any of that anymore. And if I were an undecided voter in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan, I would want to know that answer too. And the fact that she's not providing it makes you suspicious that maybe she doesn't have a good answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's just Donald Trump lies. Donald Trump's evasive. I'm not saying he's not. But for her to get the question from Brett and to say I'd enforce the law and Trump had this too, and to not say I think it's the right thing to do to provide this government, or to say, you know what, I said on tape it was the right thing, but now I don't think so. To me, it's kind of insane, but not different than what Donald Trump does. All right, Brett, welcome in. Thank you for participating. Please tell everybody where you are if they don't know, who you're supporting in case they don't know, and what's on your mind.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for doing this show. It's the bright spot of this cycle for me, so really appreciate it. I'm from Wisconsin, live in Wauwatosa, inner ring suburb. Voted for Clinton in 16, Biden in 20, and I'll be voting for Harris this year. And just have some, non-scientific anecdotes to pass on here about Wisconsin.
Please.
So in 16, everybody thought Hillary was going to win. And so a lot of people voted third party, stayed home. The voter turnout was down. I think that's what really helped Trump in 16, because the people that were for Trump were very much for Trump. Bernie Sanders won the primary here. And Hillary Clinton, as we all know, did not come after the primary season. I actually met you, Mark, when Hillary was in Milwaukee at the Boys and Girls Club. So
that's the event that told me Hillary was probably going to lose.
Yeah.
That was an afternoon event, Boys and Girls Club in Milwaukee. It was the most desolatory event of the whole campaign. There was almost nobody there. Wow, that was a crazy event.
It was. Yeah, you and I were there, and not much else. So in 2020, I think one of the reasons Biden won is I don't know how much this was. I think this was pretty much national news. We had that Kyle Rittenhouse story.
Yeah.
People were absolutely disgusted with what was going on in Kenosha and COVID and everything else, and everybody just wanted to turn the page. In 2020, Trump voters were not publicly identifying themselves in polite conversation as being so. They were all very quiet. What's different about this year is it seems like nobody's interested in a third party. I get the sense there will be a high turnout. And I also get the sense that the Trump people all came home and the Harris people are good enough with generic Democrat. They're not the Harris curious people. If they were going to vote for any Democrat, they're voting for Harris. So I think it's going to be very low third party numbers. I think it'll be high turnout. It reminds me of 2004. The Democrats hated George Bush. The dyed-in-the-wool Democrats hated George Bush, but the Bush people were very open about being for Bush. It was like a regular election. And what's interesting to me with all the drama this year, it feels more like a regular election than either 16 or 20 here. So my advice to Harris is bring some surrogates, bring some celebrities. Bruce Springsteen gave a free concert right before John Kerry won Wisconsin by 11,000 votes in 2004. And we're a pretty provincial state here. We're a sucker for some famous people. So bring Bill Clinton, bring Barack Obama, Michelle Obama would be great. All that kind of stuff. That will move the needle, I think.
Brad, I'm going to turn you over to the folks here to ask questions if they have them. But if Bruce Springsteen and Taylor Swift did a joint concert and you could pick one song for a duet, what would you like to see them do?
Islands in the Stream.
Brilliant. The correct answer was "I Got You, Babe," but you did just fine. All right. Anybody want to ask a Wisconsin Democratic question? Floor is yours.
Have you been to the Green Bay Diner and talked to people there?
I've been to Packer games, but I have not been to Green Bay at all this year. So I'm in Milwaukee. Wauwatosa is a very blue suburb. So
I have a question.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
We've talked about fracking in Pennsylvania, the Arab American conflict, and the auto workers in Michigan. Is there an issue or anything that is animating people in Wisconsin beyond the stuff we see in the New York Times and stuff?
Great question.
Yeah, really good question. I think inflation has really been big here. It's much more 6 months ago than it was now. But I think housing prices really shot up here in 2022. So, I mean, it's kind of an old saying, but if you have a 401k in a house, you're doing great. If you don't have either of those, the economy is not good for you.
Drew, Hank, Tricia. Oh, Tricia, you're muted. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, Dan beat me to the question. I was going to ask the same if there was a particular animating thing. I guess, Brent, maybe the one other question I would have would be, what are, for the folks who are still undecided as we approach the election, what are they looking for? What is it they need from one candidate or the other to get them over the line?
I mean, this sounds so shallow, but I think we want attention. We like being the center of attention. Like having the Republican convention. The Democrats kind of, not really through their own fault, snubbed us in 2020, and so I think there's some repairs.
It's because of the China virus. That's why that happened. The China virus.
The other thing I would say, up until about 6 months ago, abortion was a huge issue here because we reverted to some law from the 1800s. There have been the Wisconsin Supreme Court will be weighing in on that. But before then, there was basically, I can't remember exactly what happened, but the services are resumed here for whatever reason. And I think it might be because the DAs in Milwaukee and Dane County have basically said they wouldn't prosecute. They don't believe that the law applies or something like that. So that has become, it's still a very salient issue, but it was a really big issue in 2022.
Tricia.
Brent, I had a question. Actually, I have a twofer for you. One, who do you think your neighbors are voting for? And then secondly, are you paying much attention to the Wisconsin Senate race? I know the debate's tonight, and I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. So I live in the east side of Wauwatosa, which is, I mean, might as well be Brooklyn. It's everybody's overeducated, and it's like 80-20 Democrats in our neighborhood.
Is the hacky sack tournament Saturday or Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bernie won this district in the primary by 70-30 or something like that.
Are people passionate about Kamala Harris?
I think they like the overall vibe, as they say. They're not. I guess if she does have a problem with being somewhat vague on issues, people aren't latching on to any particular issue and saying, we're going to get healthcare expanded or anything like that. So it's more of just, I think it's mostly anti-Trump, but I think it's more of just let's return to having normal. Biden was not tracking well here before, the month between the debate and the dropout. That was, people were pretty apoplectic, but I guess that was kind of going on everywhere. There was a second question. Oh, the Senate race.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I would say for the most part, I think people are going to vote the same way in both races. I've heard at least one person has told me that she's going to vote for Eric Hovde as a check against Harris, because this person I talked to is just casting an anti-Trump vote and really has more Republican values and principles. So I think it's more likely than that Harris will win Wisconsin and Baldwin will lose Wisconsin than the other way around. I think most likely it's going to go one way or the other. The debate tonight has not been a topic of water cooler conversation. I don't think a lot of people are going to watch it. I will, but that's just because I'm a geek. So,
Brent, thank you.
Brent,
go ahead.
Brent, at this point, do you think Wisconsin's more about turnout or persuading undecideds?
I think it's about turnout. I think it's about turnout in the city of Milwaukee. It's about the UW-Madison college voters. And then for the Republicans, it's just about getting people out and, the Green Bay, Appleton, Wausau, the smaller cities. So,
yeah. Brent, great to see you again. Thank you for joining. Keep us posted. Send us all your direct mail. Thank you. Mr. Shaw, help me pronounce your first name.
Hi, thank you. My name is Olive.
Oak.
And I'm so excited to be on this platform. And, I've been seeing your show every day, twice a day on Twitter. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
We're glad to have you. Tell us where you are, who you're supporting for president, and what's on your mind, please.
Yeah, I am in California, and I'm not supporting Harris, so I'm doing an anti-Harris vote. I wish I could actually honestly vote for someone who I was excited to vote for. This is my first election. I'm an immigrant from India, and I actually have seen the immigration crisis in India firsthand. The northeast corner of India, which is bordering Bangladesh, basically had a massive influx of immigrants, and this was purposefully done. And I truly believe that the Biden-Harris administration has purposefully let the illegal immigrants into this country. And this is by repealing the executive orders that Trump had put in place, the Stay in Mexico plan, and that had an influx of almost 6 million plus immigrants. And what this did in India was it decimated the entire economy for a lot of the lower, working class people, the blue collar people. It kind of cut their wages, and they're doing, it's a very miserable economy if you go and, if you actually see it for yourself. And so I'm actually really scared because I believe that the swing states are actually decided by a few 100,000 votes. And honestly, on her website, she has a pathway to citizenship for illegal immigrants. As an immigrant, I paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to get educated, to work really hard. And a lot of my friends are not fortunate to be a citizen yet. It takes them 18 years to become a citizen by working really, really hard. And I actually feel, kind of backstabbed in a way. Like, if you have illegals infiltrating the country, and as I said, essentially decimate the economy as well as, she's quote unquote own path to citizenship. So there's no real definition of what that means. I feel that it's not good for the US. And I feel like, sorry, I want to make just one more point is that the impact of 6 million or millions of immigrants, what that does to the economy, it divides, makes the wage gap or the division between the inequality difference greater. And in addition to that, I think that, a lot of the issues that we are actually paying a lot of emphasis to, and the elephant in the room, which was in the Fox interview that Kamala Harris actually had to answer for not having, why did she actually repeal the executive orders that were already in place in the state in Mexico? I just can't understand why that was done.
Yeah. Just to clarify, were you born in California? How long have you lived in California?
No, I was born in Mumbai, India, and I came here in 2013.
Okay. And so have you voted in the past?
No, this is my first election.
Okay. Congratulations on that. And are you voting for Donald Trump, or you're not voting?
Yeah, I will be because I honestly, the immigration crisis actually scares me more than anything else. Yeah. And I feel like this would actually be a bigger issue than anything else that we're paying attention to, because this is going to be in the future, right? Right.
So that's what gives you pause about her, to say the least. What gives you pause about supporting Donald Trump, if anything?
So the positive is that, so I have a finance background, so I understand that when revenues are declining, when the economy right now is on the downtrend, to be completely frank, because of the interest rate hikes, you want to reduce corporate taxes so that it doesn't impact employment. Increasing corporate taxes actually will come out of salaries and wages. And as we've seen over the last 4 years, salaries and wages either on the real from a real basis actually has declined. So I believe that the economic policies of Trump, even though a lot of people say the tariffs are an issue and all that, but it's a negotiating tactic. But the rest of it, whether it's reducing corporate taxes, as well as allowing the consumer to be able to spend in the economy, actually is the only way we can grow ourselves out of the debt crisis.
Okay, I'd love to hear everything you said. Do you have a question for the group?
Yeah, I have one specific question. Is that historically, I was reading that Trump has always been underestimated in the polls. And do we know demographically or specifically what group of people were missed in the polls, or and whether there is any form of correction that has happened in there?
We don't.
Okay.
I mean, in theory, the people who are missed are working class voters, particularly working class white voters, who are going to be less likely to be captured depending on the methodology, and that still could be true today. I think if you were flipping a coin or pushing the question, you'd say there's a decent chance that his support is still being underestimated, but it's not a sure thing, and it depends on the polling, of course. The fact that he's doing better in the private polling, in general, which is better quality than the public polling, does suggest to me that his votes are being at least somewhat undercounted in the public polling. How much, I couldn't say. And her turnout operation may mitigate that. Hank.
Mark, how much better is he doing the private polling now than the public polling?
I mean, to generalize across the 7 states, I'd say I'd say 1, 2, or 3 points, depending on the state. Not consistently, but I'd say, again, in the aggregate. That's my sense from talking to folks. Okay. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. Marco, come on. Tell folks where you are, who you're supporting, and what's on your mind.
Hi. My name is Marco. I live in Texas, supporting Harris. My my question is this: often we see voters here on the groups asking, or you guys mentioning that Harris should apologize for any number of problems. Is there any historical analogy of a politician actually like apologizing for a position and then saying it was a mistake, let's move on? That's not like in the West Wing or like an Aaron Sorkin movie, because I can't think of one. Like,
I don't know that people want to apologize so much as either explain how she would do things differently or explain how errors were made and take some responsibility for it. And I agree. I think with the
but that's
premise,
the part, right?
yeah.
I mean,
To the extent I understood you, because your thick Texas accent is a little bit hard to cut through. But to the extent I understood you, I don't think people. I think that if this were Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or even Hillary Clinton or George W. Bush, I think they would explain it in a way that didn't hit the tripwires that I think you're suggesting would be dangerous, but could give people a better sense, not so much about being backward looking, but forward looking. When she says she wants the House, the congressional bill that Donald Trump scuttled on immigration, there's a lot in that bill. And there's a lot in that bill that the administration didn't previously support, and they certainly didn't push it early on. So just saying, here's where we are now, the border wasn't as secure as it should have been, and here's what I'm going to do, but with specificity, not I blame Donald Trump for killing a bill.
But even on that particular example, like, is there even a good way for her to do that? Because I think it's pretty clear that how badly they screwed up. I mean, like day one, they reversed all the executive orders.
Trisha's going to play Kamala Harris. Ready? Here we go. The statistics are quite clear, Madam Vice President. The border has been open. Many more people came in under your administration, under Donald Trump's. Will you take responsibility for what's occurred?
My day one priority is going to be to close the border and get an amnesty bill through Congress.
An amnesty bill. That's funny. You weren't in the spirit of what I was asking. Marco, you're right generally. I agree with you, but let's let Drew but I don't agree with you 100% because I don't think undecided voters, my senses, are fully satisfied with the way she's handling it. So how does she go forward without the tripwire? Dan and then Drew.
You took my line. I was going to say, Marco, it's not a media driven, like you need to answer and cry uncle. It's that the qualitative and quantitative data from undecided voters and even soft Republicans, like what we'll call the Haley voters, is they want to know more about her. They want to know what she will do for them. And that is where she historically kind of got stiff and robotic and was kind of like, you know, so afraid to make a mistake. And the voters kept getting more and more frustrated. So I think I hear you. She's not going to come out and be like, yeah, we really screwed that up. But to Mark's point, winning campaigns figure out how to sand that edge and assure people that you understand them, you understand the problem, and to Trisha's point, like you have a solution. Yeah. And that's where she's kind of
just to go back to the immigration thing, right? As I said, there's stuff in that bill that the base doesn't like. The bill,
that's
right?
my point, though, right?
But she's not enunciating it. All she's saying is, here's a piece of legislation I'm not going to describe that I'm for that Trump killed that was bipartisan at Langford. But that doesn't tell an undecided voter who's at all discerning, what are you for? Suddenly you're for a bill that the base doesn't like. What are your core principles about securing the border? They know what Donald Trump's core principles are: build a wall, deport everybody who got here illegally, send the military to the border. Some of it's cartoonish, but it's clear. It's a priority for him. What's in that bill that she really loves? And what she's saying to the base about being for things now that she would never have been before in favor of.
Marco, you brought up the historical context, and I don't know enough about this, and maybe other people can speak to this, but how did Al Gore, how did George Walker Bush handle this? I mean, obviously there's pitfalls in every administration, so how did they answer to it?
No, it's more, my question was more of, I'm thinking, I can't even think of a video or something I've studied where a president looked at a camera or had an interview and said, I made this mistake.
But she doesn't need to. She doesn't need to say that. She doesn't.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody's saying she needs to apologize. Trisha, the answer to your question is it's a little bit apples to oranges because Reagan and Clinton were relatively popular at the end of their administrations. So it didn't require as much repudiation. Bush said kinder and gentler, that his administration would be kinder and gentler, and that did a lot of business for him. Because to the extent there was unhappiness with Reagan in some quarters, it was that his policies affected the less fortunate, more directly. And for Gore, people were pretty happy with peace and prosperity. The challenge was about Clinton's personal conduct, and Gore found a way to kind of create some distance there. It wasn't as big a challenge because they weren't dealing with, record inflation, record border crossings, and war overseas that a lot of Americans don't understand the Biden-Harris posture. Marco, thank you for coming on. Do you want to say something else? Question? Yes, sir.
Yeah. Could it be that part of the reason is if she hits Biden too hard on this, they're afraid that she's going to look like a backstabbing betrayer in Pennsylvania?
And she said that today to Peter Alexander in the clip we showed. I don't know if you were on at the top, but there's definitely concern about that. And also, I'll tell you, just to go to a little bit of the soap opera, they don't want to have Jill Biden all of a sudden furious that they're repudiating the Biden administration, saying that, as she did the other day, my administration would not be a continuation. That did not go over great in the West Wing, but she didn't even repeat that today. She's now backslid off of that. And so it's not a consistent message. And Democrats were unhappy with her original answer. They were happier with her Bret Baier answer. I don't know now, what they'll think of this. It's a Friday, so maybe only viewers of this program will know.
And this is the problem, by the way, when you start talking to the media 3 weeks out. You're now trying to solve this problem as voters are going to the polls. This should have been done in August. I mean, I'll just vent for 1 second. But here we are, and you're explaining yourself away 2 weeks out.
Dan, shouldn't this have been done a year ago?
Different searches. Marco, 2 final questions for you. What do you think of Drew's shirt, and how'd you find out about two-way?
Drew's shirt looks well starched, and in terms of two-way, YouTube, and I read your book, so.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining. Who's going to win?
Right now, I would say Harris.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And I love your accent. Where are you actually from, Marco?
I was born in Brazil, moved here in 2004 when I was very young.
All right. You still haven't picked up. Can you speak Texan? Can you give us a little bit of
I can't. I've lived in Texas for the past, I don't even know what, 2.5 years now. And my accent changed from every state I moved to. So my English is a mishmash of, I get a little bit of everywhere. So a little bit of Massachusetts, a little bit of Texas. I say y'all now. That started happening about a year ago. I wasn't even planning on it.
All right. Texas tip. If you're speaking to more than 2 people, it's all y'all. All right. Marco, thank you for joining. Thank you to Trisha and to Dan and to Drew and to Hank for joining as well. Thank you all for joining. Monday morning, we might have specials over the weekend. You'll get an alert if we do. But we'll be back Monday morning, Dan, Sean, and I, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. for this program. And then remember on Thursday, our 2 big shows, 11 Eastern Time with Karl Rove about the Electoral College, and then a special 2-hour edition of this program next Thursday, 6 to 8 on It's All About Pennsylvania. You'll get notifications next week about how to join those programs either on YouTube or here on Two-Way. Again, Trisha, Hank, Drew, Dan, have a great weekend. Thank you for joining. We'll see everybody by Monday morning.